Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good the middle of the night, wherever you are in the world. We are here because The Who are announcing a North American tour performing Quadrophenia plus Who classics. This marks their first North American tour dates in 4 years. 37 dates across the whole of the States, and I'm pleased to welcome Roger Daltrey and Pete Townshend to the studio answering your questions. And the first question has to be, why now and why Quadrophenia?
The writer.
Now, well, as you said, it was 4 years since we've been out. We've been trying to find something we could do together, Roger and I, for a while. You know, we've gone off in slightly different directions. Roger's been working with a new band. I've been developing new music and writing a book about my life. So we've really struggled to find something to do this time. So in a sense, Quadrophenia for us this time was something that we both felt that we could get together on and look at again, because the last time we did it was in 1997. So that's the reason for now. It's just we've been anxious to work together and before we drop dead.
It's a massive piece of work. Would you kind of describe it as The Who's Mount Everest?
It is for a singer. But I mean, what's great about doing it now is we can. It's still a work in progress, and hopefully it will keep developing, and we might even get it into some really kind of up-to-date modern show, something very, very different from what we had back in '97. And I don't know how many more years I'm going to be able to sing this music. My voice is great at the moment, so I'm just going to explore the possibilities that at one time I might sing Quadrophenia, and it's a little bit easier.
It is a massive album with some very universal themes. There must be something about the record that you still find fascinating to want to go out and do a tour of this kind of magnitude.
The thing I like about it, to counter what not to counter, but to supplement what Roger just said, for me it's very easy. When I wrote it, I wrote it pretty much all on guitar. There are a few keyboard bits, but so everything falls under my fingers. It flows very naturally. It feels a very graceful piece for me to perform. So I love performing it as a piece, and it kind of flies by. And I'm very aware that it's a taxing vocal piece. I mean, it's not just the obvious tracks like Love, Rain or Me, which is a vocal tour de force, really. But the whole Roger's spoken about a show in a sense. When Quadrophenia was first finished back in '73, one of my frustrations was that I imagined it was going to go straight out on the road, not exactly as a show, but something quite close to a show. So for me, that realisation of the music as a show is really important. But there's something else about it which is great for me, which is that you can hear that Roger has a tremendous creative investment in this. And I think it's one of the few things that we've done where we've been able to come together. I know what my job is. I wrote it a long time ago. You know, what Roger is doing these days is actually creating a new way of putting it across, and as he says, bringing it up to date. So I think, it's a place where we both feel comfortable doing what we do together.
Although the themes are universal, the story's very, very English. Can you remember what the American audiences made of it when they first heard it? Did they understand it?
I think it's easy to understand. It's that period of your life when you're going through adolescence, and you're trying to find out who you are, and hopefully you get to that point quite soon after your teens. Obviously, some people would get into their 30s before they get there. Maybe even their 70s. So that kind of story doesn't change. And what I find really interesting now, looking back on our lives, which is and our period, which is what where Pete wrote it from, is that how much of the historical significance of it and the events going on at the time are apropos completely to today. Not exactly the same events, but the same situations. Enormous change. So I don't think that there's any problem there. And what I like about our period particularly, though, that we were very lucky with, is that the mod culture was such a clean style. It had it was sharp.
Not going out of date, is it? Really?
No, it's sharp, and I really love that. The same thing with the Teds. That in its own way was sharp. Rockers were a mess. Hippies were a mess. It's been a mess ever since. But the mods are still sharp.
Because there's a film as well that you've made documenting the story of the album, what the band was up to at the time. How was it kind of revisiting the record and really looking at it closely?
I can tell you that my part in it was the writing about the record and going back through the tapes was quite enjoyable. I found doing the documentary quite difficult, and I'm pleased at the positive response to it. And I think I was going to say about the thing about the American audience, that one of the things that we had difficulty with was the fact that when the movie first went to America, people couldn't understand what was being said. And there were rumours that the versions of it were going around the States. This is back in 79, 80, with subtitles, you know, so that people could understand. But the original movie too. It's interesting. In my notes for this conference, I wrote that the film gave the characters in the album flesh. And I think that too was really, really important, you know, the fact that somehow, and the re-release of the movie is wonderful because that's been redubbed and now you really can hear what people are saying. The sound has been very, very carefully redubbed, the film has been restored. So the original movie is worth a look as well. But you know, I'm delighted with the response to the documentary. I put a lot of work into it and into the box set that preceded it, and but I loved it. I love going back to Quadrophenia always. It's a passion of mine. I love it.
Because as a record, compared to its kind of fellow concept album, Tommy, it feels more focused, tighter, more maybe tethered in the real world. Was that something that you intended to do when you recorded the record? Because it reflects you as a band, doesn't it?
In a way it does. What's very interesting is that when we talk about this idea that Jimmy reflected the band, at the very end of the record, Roger and I had not exactly a standoff, but it was about what happened in the way that the album cover should be perceived. And it was that somehow it was natural to see everything upside down. In other words, that the reflection process that we believed in at the time, I think, or at least we talked about it in the time, was that we reflected our fans in some way. In 1972-73, we'd had a really fantastic period of success, and what we needed, in a sense, to find our reflection in our fans. And that's kind of what that album became about. We just went into the studio, recorded the songs. The band was in peak condition, I have to say, as a kind of a recording machine. The songs were good, you know, everything fell into place, the mix worked out very well. But looking back at it now, it's easy to see that what was actually great about it was the fact that it actually allowed us, you know, we weren't trying to be mods. We never felt like we were mods in the first place, but we reconnected with our audience, I think. I think we really did. And funnily enough, which you get a sense of when you watch the documentary, the fact that we made that record in Battersea, it's not our neighbourhood at all, but it was a council estate, you know, a project, they call it in America, with ordinary people around. It somehow, it made us feel that we had our feet back on the ground. After all the heady days of Tommy and Barbara O'Reilly and Who's Next and all of that stuff.
You've talked before, both of you, about trying to bring the narrative to life on stage, and I guess that's still going to be, that's still a challenge for an album like this. How are you going to approach it on these dates?
We're not there yet. We're getting there. But that kind of falls more to my job. I'll try and do it much more visually. I mean, I try to go back to the initial idea and the thought that when people were first exposed to Quadrophenia, it was just a record with a sleeve that they read. But once they put those cans on, that world it's all in their head. So that's the canvas. So it can go anywhere. Once you stop trying to, that's in some ways, what I don't like about the film, that it is, you know, it's in the real world. I'm much more interested in what's going on and where these, what's, you know, a deeper level of where the songs come from. And I think what's interesting now is that because we can look back. We've been around long enough. There's a bloody great deal to look back on, you know. So there's, but there's, and like I said earlier, there's a lot of similarities to today. The opportunity to do something visually very extraordinary and create something that people go away at least and think about, which maybe they haven't seen in Quadrophenia before. Because the songs are so superb, but they come from a very deep space within the psyche. And that's what I'm interested in getting across. So the whole thing is a trip, is a journey. And I just want to take people on a good one.
That's fantastic.
You're coming.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to see it. I'll be in the wrong place.
What are the moments when you have performed Quadrophenia in the past that you really love the most? Obviously, you enjoy the album playing it. You wouldn't be doing it live if you didn't. But
bloody hell, you know. Funnily enough, the only bit of the Quadrophenia experience that I can remember was doing it at Madison Square Garden, which was a really chaotic experience. You know, that we had Phil Daniels narrating. It was just chaos, but it was wonderful chaos, but it was chaos. And I remember that
chaos the British do best.
And then we went out and did, I don't know, I was shocked to hear something like 130 shows or something. I don't remember a single one of them. So for me, the most recent thing that we did was we remounted it again, very much the way we did it in 1997 for a teenage cancer show at the Royal Albert Hall. And for me, we had a rehearsal and etc. But I was on the stage, and maybe because it was the Royal Albert Hall and it's a posh place, I stood there and played and listened, and I didn't have very much to do. I didn't have, there was no gymnastics involved, no showing off really, just playing the music. Was hearing it for the first time and realising it that just as a piece of music, as Roger just said, it stands up and it offers a journey. Whether you choose to go on that journey is another story. The thing about it that's interesting is that it really is, there's a poignancy to the way that, for me, that it connects me to my younger days. That's I don't know quite, it's certainly not nostalgia. I don't have any nostalgia for the mod days, but there's a poignancy to being reconnected to all those feelings. And it doesn't feel to me like self-indulgent. It's not like, oh, wasn't it great when we were mods and we were young and, we were playing. But the Who were a very, very young band. We were very young when we started. In 1963, 64, playing to those audiences, we were just kids. And our audience, some of them were even younger. So for me at the Albert Hall, it was like, wow, this is a real connection with and it did exactly what I wanted to do back in the 70s. It did it again for me. It reconnected me with the crowd, some of whom were old mods and some of whom were much, much younger. And as Roger said, it seems to still have some relevance, some potency. Not quite sure how that works, but I think it might be because the image of the mods is so clean cut. It's a cool image. It's not, some youth stuff, some youth films have aged badly, and the mod thing has managed to prevail. I think it still has a coolness about it.
As a live entity, The Who, there was doubts across your sort of career as to whether you could keep transmitting that energy and delivering. And at every point you have, in fact, almost to the point of maybe surprising people, about sort of 10 years ago when you started to play live with a lineup very similar to the one you have at the moment. Tell us a bit about your band, because, The Who are still a powerful live machine to this day.
Well, the band is there it is. And that's where, the energy comes. Pete drives it on the guitar, and I give it as much as I can give it on the vocal. And the band is basically the same. It's Pino Palladino, Zach Starkey, Simon Townshend. We have to augment with this because there are, there's a lot of brass parts, string parts, and all kinds of things. But it all comes. That energy comes. If it's not sitting here, it doesn't come at all. Don't worry about that.
And in terms of the chemistry on stage, does it still feel
like a war zone?
So how would you describe it? Is that a fitting way of putting it?
Yeah, well, there's something happens. There is a chemistry, but it's wonderful. It's wonderfully exciting. We drive each other. Pete drives me, and I hope I drive him.
No, absolutely. Definitely.
And that's what it's about. It's very rarely dull, and if you can get that doing your job, you're lucky.
I agree. I think, the other thing that Roger and I carry, despite the fact that we do always have the ability to work with the most fabulous musicians, we can take our pick, and the guys that we've got around us now are wonderful. We miss the other two guys very much. We were lucky enough, Roger and I, to be able to tour, from about 2000 onwards with for a while with John Entwistle, and so we had that reinvention back with us with Zach Starkey on the drums. And what was interesting about that is that there was this constant drive, in a sense, to kind of recreate the old Who. It's a bit like Springsteen going out with the original members of the E Street Band. You want to hear that kind of sound. When John Entwistle died, so we then didn't have Keith Moon and we didn't have John Entwistle, somehow what actually happened, for me anyway, I don't know about for Roger, there was a sense of being liberated, being able to I don't want to make a good thing out of two deaths, but sometimes that's just what happens. I'm not saying that what I do now is better than what I did then, but I do feel freer to explore what I did as a musician back then, but also to find new things. And I think one of the first things that happened was I started to listen to this guy, to Roger. I don't know that I'd done it that much.
You couldn't hear me.
I could actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I could never hear me.
I'm closer to the side fills than you are. But no, and working in a sense in a much more musical way, like complementary way with Roger's voice, was something that in fact that's something that's still going on. It's still a learning process. But the first time I became aware of it is we were playing Love Rain on Me, and I suddenly realised that I had to be really quite careful, in a sense, not to get in the way, and that everything that I played really mattered to whatever it was that Roger did next. Much more of a kind of, in posh musical circles they call it obbligato, playing in a sense so that you play to support the person that's got the job of delivering the song, and so that's kind of been a new field for me, and that, because it's new for me, that's what I look forward to. I have the Who have played the same music for such a long time on the stage, and although you can come back and reviving it, it's lovely to have new challenges. This is a new challenge for me, funnily enough, playing this piece. And as Roger says, is if he can cook up a new way of putting it across, that will bring up musical issues. There's no question. To musical challenges, musical problems, musical excitement, and some extraordinary moments. That's what I hope for, because most of it, of course, is hanging around waiting to do the show, being on a tour.
And it's not just going to be Quadrophenia that you'll be playing live. You will be delving into the back catalogue to deliver some songs. Can we expect some stuff we haven't heard before, the classics?
You won't get them all. That'd be a 5-hour show, but we'll do a good portion of stuff. And try and vary that, I hope anyway. But I saw Paul McCartney recently at a concert he did for me for the Teenage Cancer Trust, and I really realised when he did that concert that people, they do so much want to hear the hits, and it's great to hear the classic stuff like Quadrophenia, and if we can get a great show out of it, that's wonderful. But to kiss them goodnight, what better than Barbara O'Reilly, and Won't Get Fooled Again? Maybe not on the same night together, but those fabulous songs that Pete's written, I'm very proud to have been involved in singing them in the first place, and touch wood, still can.
The old chestnuts.
Yeah, there's nothing better.
You wheel out the old chestnuts, wheel out the old favourites, and you can...
The overall tale of Quadrophenia does address a certain kind of youth, the teenage issues. How do you think that narrative applies to kids today in a world where people can connect? They're so hyper-connected on social media and stuff. Do you think the themes that made you want to write Quadrophenia are still relevant in the same way?
I think, you know, I think the situation is sharpened by that. I think, you know, if you're one of those people that gets left out of the loop somehow, if you can't do Twitter, God, you must feel pretty lonely. You know what I mean? That's really what it's about. This is about a young man who doesn't fit in, that's all. And so, yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I think the other...
Don't you think that's part of the adolescent journey, isn't it? There's those periods where you really don't... I think everyone goes through that, I'm sure. I've never really met someone who always felt they fitted in, have you?
No, that's right. And I think, but I do think that today, you know, what's so extraordinary about social media? That in one of the questions for the press release, I don't know who asked the questions, but one of the questions was, there's a lot of interest now in the album format. Lots of new artists are playing their albums on stage in completion, and I suddenly realised, actually, that's just an echo. You know, what actually happened in the 60s was that singles were what pop artists did. We didn't do albums. Nobody did albums. You know, the albums were just collections of singles with some throwaways thrown in. It was those two important albums of the 60s. It was Sgt. Pepper and Pet Sounds that made this thing about the album as being something that was worth sitting down and listening to. But also there was the drug culture, the fact that, you know, people smoked pot and they would sit for an hour and a half and listen to a whole album from start to finish if it was a double. So in a sense, perhaps what's happening now is as the internet is getting faster, as broadband is getting faster, that people are finding that they do, you know, the idea that young people have a short attention span, it's just rubbish. I think that, you know, that what's actually happening is that music is becoming such a richer, deeper field. When somebody finds something that they love, they will give it more of their time and attention. Going back to your question, I think that young people, not just young people, everybody are now starting to communicate through texting, through emails, you know, through Facebook, through, you know, all kinds of social media. And one of the difficulties with that is that if it's not a place where you can be absolutely authentic to yourself, you will have great difficulty when you try to, in a sense, mature, grow, you know, move into... And that's what Quadrophenia is about. It's this young man who realises that he hasn't quite managed to solve the problems of growing up. And what he has to do is he has to sit and offer it up to the universe. And that's all he can do. And I can well imagine that there are kids, young people all over the planet at the moment coming to that point in their life where they put the computer aside and they just try to sit with themselves and find out what does it feel like to sit in the rain and pray. I don't know. I can imagine it's happening everywhere.
This is a question I've been given that I think might get a shorter answer. It's quite fashionable to, there's talk of holographic images of Elvis and Tupac and various people going on stage. Has there been any talk of incorporating holographic images of Keith Moon and John Entwistle into the show?
Thought about it, but everybody's doing it now. I wanted to do something like this a couple of years ago when no one had done it. It's very expensive to carry. I don't know whether we need it. There are other things you can do. And it's only a gimmick. We were very good on gimmicks in the 70s, but I think we can leave that alone now.
Pete, you've had ear problems in the past. How are you feeling in terms of going out and making a hell of a racket again?
I'm all right at the moment. You know, when you say ear problems, the problems that I've had have been tinnitus, and that's something that long periods of being careful about, you know, exposure to sound. You know, I love sailing as well. It's one of the things that I do in my spare time, and that ain't too good for the hearing either. The wind and So it's not just being on stage. And also my problems were created in the studio, not on the stage. I've had some trauma created from being on the stage. And when I think about how traumatic some of the experiences that I've had on the stage have been for me, I can't imagine what it's been like for Roger. I don't actually protect my ears. I don't go on with earplugs. I don't use in-ears either. I can't actually wear in-ear monitors because they actually give me very bad tinnitus. But you know, one of the things I like about Quadrophenia is that it tends to be a little bit more controlled.
Oh, that's the old one.
Yeah, the controlled level.
I told you about the new one.
In terms of the live bands, last time you had like an extended group and you had strings and horns and guest singers. Is that something that you're going to be thinking about this time?
Well, you have to have the instruments, but it won't be quite as big. Not sure, but don't think we need guest singers. I think there's other ways to do it.
Because it's an album that does lend itself to, you know, maybe in the same way that Roger Waters has done The Wall as this grand epic. Would you be maybe considering expanding it maybe to make it a larger production at any point in the future?
I would, he wouldn't. In a nutshell, I think, you know, as the composer, I like the idea of it being as grand as possible. I think what Roger wants is he wants to be able to, don't mind me speaking for you here,
you speak to me.
wants to be able to really sing the story authentically, to really feel it, and I think that's why I think it's important that Roger should drive the creative side of this.
Well, I think the thing for me is that as a singer, you have to know when you have to know what you're inhabiting when you're singing it, and it's a strange process. You can't just be in a vacuum. So it has to make a kind of different sense to a singer than it does to a guitarist playing chords.
I agree.
And that's always been a bit of my difficulty with Quadrophenia in the production we did in 96 and 97. But I think there are ways around it, and I think I've found most of the keys. And it's going to, like I say, it's going to be a very big challenge. But one of the problems I would think Pete has in some ways had with putting his music into stage form is the fact that people tend to put it into a standard Broadway production. His music and the things that he writes about are so different. You almost have to invent a whole new staging and a whole new world for them to inhabit. And that's what I'm trying to do with this. But we're doing it with us up there. I mean, whether that will move to another band playing it and doing the same thing, I don't know. I would like to think it could perhaps do that.
Out of all the Who albums in the past, you've both said that you reckon that Quadrophenia is your kind of crowning achievement. It's maybe your masterpiece. Do you still feel that way now when you're coming up to facing 37 dates playing it across the States?
I think Pete's written equally good stuff, but I think as an album that holds together most, because there was no interference from other writers. We used to always have 2 John Entwistle songs on most of the other albums. It's obviously Pete's pinnacle, I think, of his.
I'm proud of it in that sense. It feels it. It's difficult because it's funny. I did just thinking the other day how there's somebody asked me to comment on It's Hard, which was the Who's very last studio album with the touring band before we split up for a long period in '82, and I always think of it as quite an unsuccessful record in some ways. I went back to listen to it, and it's actually quite an extraordinary album. There's one song on there, that song called One Life's Enough, which is a very, very lilting love song, and I thought, I'll make sure I get sing a track on the album because I do. And Roger sang it. Roger loved it and sang it. And I listened to it the other day, and it's one of the most extraordinary vocal performances. It reminds me of when you crack that "see me, feel me, touch me, heal me" refrain on Tommy, which just kind of completely linked the two ends of the character together and created the Tommy that became the centre of the piece. And I think, all of the albums have their qualities. The interesting thing about The Who is we made so few compared to, AC/DC, Rolling Stones, and, if the Beatles had kept making albums, they would have made about 150 by now. We didn't make albums very quickly. So Quadrophenia does kind of stick out as being the most successful, I think, the most successful rendition of the band as a guitar, bass, drums band. Funnily enough, there are lots of brass, there are lots of synthesizers. There's, I play violin here and there badly, but the most important thing was that the band was on fire, I think, and that's for me why it's so important. I felt I gave the band a really great piece of music. I then jumped into the band, we recorded it, and it worked, and it felt to me like an experiment gone right at a time when the band was at its peak, as I said when we started.
How do you expect fans are going to react to seeing Quadrophenia, Can You See the Real Me, which is the film, in movie theatres? Do you think people are going to be surprised by any elements of it? I was surprised to find out that at one point you say you were on the verge of just leaving and sort of quitting the band, despite the fact this amazing piece of work was being done.
That wasn't as much to do with what you'd imagine. I think that, should quickly say there were two other things going on.
Splitting up from the first bloody week.
Yeah, you can joke about it, but there was a serious thing. That we had two problems. One was our manager Kit Lambert, who we adored and I really needed as a songwriting mentor, and he was coming apart at the seams. And the other thing was that Keith Moon was coming to pieces, and we couldn't really see why. He was behaving really, really strangely all the time and starting to become almost a caricature of himself. And he was funny, so he got away with it a lot. But I felt that I was losing these two Ks in my life, Kit and Keith. They were getting more and more difficult to grapple with. And in fact, I brought Kit Lambert in to try to help produce Quadrophenia. God, that was a mistake. I mean, he was a nightmare. But that was really, and there were lots of money problems that we were suffering from at the time. It's fine to look back now and kind of think of us as having sold so many records and getting great reviews, but we had no fucking money. And I mean, seriously, and when you actually look at the way that the finances of the band were managed, you would understand why. You need to kind of go into it with a fine-tooth comb to understand why. It was an outrage. And so one of the problems that I had at the time is that I felt that we were really at our peak and doing fantastic work, but would it actually make any difference to the quality of life that we lived, and would we be able to afford to maintain, a spender like Keith Moon? I was a spender too, as well, but I spent my money on useful things, like studios. But
why did you choose North America for the Quadrophenia tour, and will you be thinking about rolling it out to other territories and festivals?
One step at a time. America, it's somewhere where if you're going to tour anywhere, it's the easiest place in the world to tour. And fabulous audiences. I love the American people. They've been incredibly good to us.
Any planned? Would you like to take it out?
As Roger said, it's one foot in front of the other. We're really pleased, I think. I'm excited, actually, but we're pleased to have this tour to announce. I think in the past, what's actually happened when we did the last tour, that tended to roll on a bit, and and then we eventually went to Japan and to Australia and New Zealand, But we never ever cracked South America. We never got to Mexico. We didn't play in any of the European countries outside of the Latin ones. So, but we did play in Spain for the first time on the last tour, and that was something that we'd waited a long time to do, and it was fantastic when we did it. Festivals would be quite difficult for me, I think. And I think, if I can just speak for myself here for a minute, you asked about my hearing early on. When you're in a festival, you get a short set, you're with a load of young guys covered in tattoos or sexy birds with their tits out. What do? I catch fire. I show them how to do it. If I show them how to do it and I catch fire, I tend to come off thinking, oh my God, have I done myself some more damage? I want to continue as an older man to write music and to be involved in the music business. And I don't know whether festivals could be tricky, but I'm hoping that we can find a way to do them because we both love them. We love doing them. But the other thing about festivals, you should, look at the weather here. God. And the thing, reading about the Isle of Wight Festival, it broke my heart. It broke my heart. And, you're subject to God's whim. Or is it God, or is it something darker? Is it G4?
What are you preparing for the Olympics performance that you're doing?
Has it been announced that we're doing it? I mean, officially announced.
Well, George Michael's there.
Is he?
Russell Brand is singing a song with Jessie J. I know that.
Well, we prepared something that's...
There's an announcement today, actually. Yeah.
We prepared something well, I've prepared something, and Pete's given me the free rein to do it. It is a great finale to the event. Because it's not a rock show. We can't do it live. We have to mime. We could do it live standing on our heads. We've done it for 50 years. But because there's athletics there all day, the technical issues are just so great.
It would be difficult for Madonna to do her... Oh!
But anyway, we've recorded a piece of music, we have recorded a piece of music which I think is a fabulous ending for the Olympics. And a fabulous... just something that shows the great music that's come out of this country, and this country's put some fabulous music into the world, and this is not about us being on the end of the Olympics. For me, it was not really about the Who being on a TV show.
You said you wanted to go to the Caribbean.
Well, I did, but it's not about the Who being on a TV show. It's about just making great music that is apropos to the end of that event, where you've had people who have given perhaps the last 8 years of their lives to be there on that field, doing their thing.
I agree.
Going home with, some with absolute joy, but hopefully all of them with the joy that they actually made it to the field and they competed. It's not about the Who. It's about much, much more. And we're there to represent what the show is supposed to be about, which is the arts that have come out of England, Britain. And I think the music that I've come up with really does, it's a great representation of...
Even if he says so himself.
I do, I'm very proud. I'm extremely proud of it. I'm very proud.
It works, it definitely works. Yeah, as a kind of... I suppose you wouldn't, you might call it a medley, but it's not quite that. It's a very, very carefully structured thematic piece.
An awful lot of thought into that.
And it works incredibly well. It works incredibly well. I think it will work well.
And the final question for today is, will there be any new Who material? Will you be recording together again?
Well, I'm writing right now. As soon as I put down this bloody life story book, I immediately picked up my music.
Give it to me, I'll put it down.
music again. No, I said as soon as I did put it down, I went back to music, and I'm writing all the time. The only thing is that I'm not sure whether what I write today, you know, whether you can rubber stamp it as Who music. But I think on the last album, what we found was that Roger and I, we will adapt to whatever happens and whatever I write, and we'll see what happens. So all I can really do is write the music and pass it to Roger and see what happens. Whether or not, it's a weird thing where we get to a place where we kind of go, is this the Who or not? It's a bit like, you know.
I just think whatever you write, even if it's a piece of jazz and it's got words and you play it and I sing it, that's Who music. That'll do me.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, I think you just.
It works for that works for me too. But I do think people
thinking about what we are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though when you look at other artists, for example, you know, as a Bruce Springsteen fan from the very, very start, you know, I want to hear him grow within the framework of what I recognise and what I believe is Bruce Springsteen at his best. I don't want him playing all that hillbilly music, all that hee-haw on Hudson River nonsense, you know. So I think in a sense we're in the same boat, you know.
Maybe we could do that.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure and an honour. Thank you for all your questions online. Roger Daltrey and Pete Townshend taking the Who across America, 37 dates across the States. Their first North American tour in 4 years. Tickets go on sale beginning Friday the 20th of July. General sale to the public on July the 27th. And there's screenings of Quadrophenia, Can You See The Real Me, the story behind the album in the US on July the 24th and Canada on August the 4th. Oh, August the 1st. I apologise. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you all for being here.